There we go. Hi, folks. Yeah, oh, good. Thumbs up and everything already. Hey, Tim. Great. Good to see you guys. It is just so great to be here with my dear friend, Gareth Higgins. We are going to wait just maybe another minute or two to let folks join before we get started. But I'm out in Utah and Gareth is in Belfast, so we got our time zones straight. So that makes me very happy. So good. Shall we just jump in, Gareth?
Sure.
Get going and great. Okie dokie. So it is really my pleasure to welcome everyone to this special Raven event with author, storyteller, activist, and my good friend Gareth Higgins. We're going to be talking about your new book, Gareth, How Not to Be Afraid. 7 Ways to Live When Everything Seems Terrifying, which seems to be the book we need to hear right now. It's not been an easy task for most of the last year for us to not be afraid. So at least we have that to unite us and bring us together, that's for sure. So I'm Suzanne Ross. If this is your first Raven event, we're super glad you joined us. We hope you feel welcome here. Raven's a community for those who've been wounded or alienated by their experience with organized religion. We believe that despite what you may have been told, God is a God of love and mercy who is best known to us through our doubts and questions. We believe that coming from a place of doubt is the best starting place to discover what God is doing in our midst right now during these very challenging yet strangely hopeful times. So Gareth, it's again a pleasure to welcome you. We're so excited for the launch of the book. I will hold it up and hope people can read it. It's always backwards for me. But anyway, it's a beautiful cover. How Not to Be Afraid, 7 Ways to Live When Everything Seems Terrifying. And I would like to start our conversation, Gareth, by telling you a story. Because this is as much a book about story as it is about fear. And I thought to myself, Gareth is an amazing storyteller, but who's telling Gareth stories? So I hope you'll let me tell you a story.
I'd love to hear it.
It's about a time that you told me a story, the very story that I needed to hear. It was about 6 or 7 years ago, around the time that I was turning 60. I'd started to feel sad, a little lost. I was really not finding any reason to get up in the morning. I mean, it sounds silly, but the things that had excited me weren't exciting me anymore. And I couldn't think of anything I really wanted to do. And I guess I was looking for meaning. And I thought maybe I should go on a spiritual retreat or something. When what landed in my inbox, but an invitation to go on a spiritual retreat to Northern Ireland led by you. And it felt like an answer to prayer because I already knew and loved you. I didn't have to question that the spirit was at work in my inbox. So off we went. And the first night of this retreat, we were sitting in this beautiful historic village in an old Irish house that was exactly what you think an old Irish house would look like. And you told the story that you tell in the book about the time a Swiss Armed Forces veteran asked you to share a cigarillo with him under the Eiffel Tower. And after each scene in the story, you said, "You never know when a story is over, especially when you're in it." And you must have said that 3 or 4 times as you told the story. And each time I felt my heart soften and happiness become a possibility again. Those words are still so important to me. And that story changed how I thought about my future and how I live my present. And so, in front of witnesses, Gareth, let me say thank you for that story, and that I hope you're hearing the stories that you need to hear too.
You're so welcome, and thank you. And I remember that. And it's really good to be reminded. I think partly because we tell the stories that we need to hear. And I think part of that is actually we notice the stories in other people's lives that we need to hear ourselves. And there's always been, I actually think it's probably not only inevitable, but helpful that human beings notice needs in other people that may even be deeper within ourselves. That's why we notice those needs.
Yeah.
We're tuned into seeing it, but we don't see our own needs from the perspective of somebody outside who might be able to help us. So 6 or 7 years on from that, even listening to you right now, I'm sitting here going, yeah, you're right. You never know when a story's over, especially when you're in it. Thank you. I need to be reminded of that. I need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, there is just something, I don't know, as you get a little older, this is just a feeling of maybe winding down. Are things winding down? And that way of thinking about story in your own life keeps it open-ended. My life is still open-ended. You don't know when you don't know when your life's going to end, when the story about who you are is going to end. It never ends, actually. Right?
Yeah. Well, even after your body has ended or your body has returned to dust, the story's not over. And I think I've been thinking about this a bit lately, like the I call it the third age, like the thing that we can sort of predict would be the last third of our lives.
Yes.
Right. That like this is a new moment in human history when people can actually think about that as, oh, this is another chapter, rather than this is the concluding chapter, or this is the last page. And now it certainly has something to do with the concluding chapter, or the chapter that gives way to whatever the next volume is after you're gone, but you can seize it and claim it and live it with consciousness and passion.
Yeah. Why is the last chapter any less meaningful than the first? That's where you get in that mindset, where less, I don't know. It was just, you can see that, you can hear the emotion in my voice still. It just had put joy back. That's all I can say.
I'm so happy to be reminded.
Just such a beautiful story. And I'm so glad you told it in the book. I'm so glad. And it's funny because, it's a book about fear. And that's, at the time, I wouldn't have said to you, oh, Gareth, I feel afraid. But I think I might have been. I think that I was experiencing a fear of what you talk about in the book, about a fear of a meaningless life. And there was something about that, about a search for meaning, I think. But what I do want to do is, we're going to get into some more about the book, and just really invite people to put their comments or questions in the chat room, because we will get to those. And we want your voices to be part of this conversation as well. Whether you've had a chance to read the book or not, we really want to hear your questions. And especially if there is a fear that you're experiencing that you can name. We are willing to ask questions or share about it. We'd love to hear that. And again, sometimes it's, for me, it takes me a little while to identify what's happening for me and to name it. And I know that's part of what you're doing with the book, Gareth, is helping people name the experiences they're having in a way that, as you say, helps them live. I mean, the subtitle is 7 Ways to Live, not things you should be afraid of, you know. Um, so I wanted to really dive a little bit more into story with you, Gareth, because I, I was really surprised by that a story had so much impact on me at that time. Because I know sometimes we talk about story, we say, oh, it's just a story. We diminish it, or we say, oh, it's not true because it's just a story, even though, you know, it's a story about something that might have happened to someone. But can you talk a little bit about the role of story in how we do find meaning
Yeah.
in our lives?
Yeah. I was at a retreat once when that began. It was about 30 people in a room that looks very much like what I imagine the room you're in right now, because it had a lot of wood
Yeah.
on the walls. About 30 of us there, and the two people leading the retreat had a bowl, and the bowl had 30 grapes in it. And this was our banquet for the opening night. They handed the bowl to each other, and they took one grape each, and then they handed the bowl around the circle. We took one grape each, and then the two leaders invited us to watch what they were doing, hear what they were saying, and follow what they were doing, mirroring them ourselves. And they would peel some of the skin off the grape, which is kind of hard to do without pulling some of the chunks of the grape out.
Yeah.
And then they would eat the skin and savor it and just chew it and do that thing, you know, chew your food 40 times, not because your parents are saying you're in trouble if you don't, so that you can enjoy the grape.
Yeah.
And then to think about the fact that the seeds of the life of the grape are inside the grape.
Mm.
And that when we consume the grape, and if we were living close enough to nature, we would consume the grape. The seeds would work their way through our system. They would then grow into more grapes. And they took maybe 15 minutes to dwell on this. This was our banquet, our opening night banquet. And the reason I say that in response to this question about how the relationship between stories and shaping meaning is, it was just a bowl of grapes. It could have been heard as offensive or insulting. I paid to go to this retreat, and this is what you call the opening night banquet. Now, there actually was a full meal served as well, but or it could just be a bowl of grapes. And here's the thing, it's probably 5 years since I was at that retreat. I have thought about grapes differently ever since I heard the story of the banquet of one grape. I think about them differently, and it has an echo in how I think about all food. Now, it's not as my friend Nance says, when I was Nance is somebody who I think is really enlightened, and she's not a fan of being called enlightened. And I was thanking her for how she shows up and what she teaches me, and she said, appreciate you saying that, but I want to say I don't live there all the time, but I do like to visit, right? And I'm visiting more often, and so I would love to embody or live the story of the banquet of one grape with every piece of food that I eat, simply because my life would be better and the earth would be better, because I'd be treating the earth better. There'd be the virtuous circle of, you know, the best food is the most colorful food, is the healthiest food, is the food that's the most ethically sourced and produced. And we feel better physically after we eat it, whatever the best food for you happens to be.
Right.
And that all came from one story. So I could tell you 1,000 other examples of something mundane as it presents itself. It's just a bowl of grapes that gets transformed by somebody telling a story about it. And I think it works both ways, light and shadow.
Yeah.
And I think that what we are tasked with facing and overcoming is the fact that the brain at a neuroscientific level, our culture at a sociological level, our politics, our religion, and our media at an institutional level, and also the media that comes in the form of these devices that we all carry around with us. And so we are part of the media, all of us now, the smartphones. That all 5 of those things, the brain, culture, politics, religion, and media, all have a negativity bias. They all have an anxiety bias. So the story that we default to in the absence of an intervention is scarcity, judgment, struggle, and those can all be summarized by one word, and the word is fear.
Yeah.
And what we are invited to do, and I consider this, there's days when it feels really hard, right? And there's moments of even the best days when it feels really hard. But sometimes I catch a glimpse of the opportunity that we're being given at this moment in history. I catch a glimpse that many human beings are becoming conscious of this fact, that we have this negativity, anxiety, fear bias.
Yeah.
And that we know more than we've ever known before about how to overcome it. Because underneath our fear is what we love. We fear things happening to what we love, whether it's our reputation or our property values. And then you might want to look at that, because those are kind of superficial things, and get underneath that. What it all comes down to is the people I love.
Yeah.
The people I love. And telling stories consciously isn't just an invitation or an opportunity to overcome the fear bias. I think it's actually a moral and ethical responsibility.
Yeah.
Even if the only impact is that it enables you to live with a bit more breathing space between you and the world. That's a good thing. It doesn't mean withdrawing. Actually, the most effective activists are the most emotionally healthy activists. And the most emotionally healthy people also tend to become activists. It's a recursive relationship. But I'll pause there, because I want to hear more from you and go back and forth on this. But that's what I think about. Like, we're telling stories all the time, whether it's a bowl of grapes or a miracle.
Yeah.
And how we perceive it is up to the story we're telling.
Well, and Gareth, it's funny because that negativity bias or that fear bias, for me, it convinced me that one of the stories was more true than the other. So the one that emphasized the fear, or what, like, because when I was like in my teens, I noticed that my initial reaction to an event could be very negative, or I'd be resentful, or like, why did someone do that to me? And whatever. And then I realized, Suzanne, you could, think about it differently. You could think they were in a bad mood, or it's not about you, or whatever. And I would feel better. But I thought I was tricking myself, because the truth was my first reaction. That the truth was that she was mean to me. And so I think when I was reading that in the book about that, I thought the power of this, you explain it, that the thing you see the most is the thing you expect to happen again, or there's some
I'll explain it briefly. It's a phenomenon that's understood in social psychology through the very highfalutin term, the availability heuristic or the
That's
availability bias. And it's the idea that humans predict the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can remember examples of similar things happening. So if you feed yourself a diet of extreme violence, for instance, on the news every night, and you are asked, how likely do you think more incidents of extreme violence are to happen? Research has shown you're likely to vastly overpredict how often such events actually take place.
and that feels true. It
It does
feels
feel true.
true
Yes,
to
it
you.
feels true at a gut level. And that's what I mean about the brain has a negativity bias,
Yeah.
which has been reinforced and
Mhm.
fed into culture, politics, religion, and media. You know,
Yeah.
when an earthquake happens, people buy earthquake insurance after the earthquake, right?
Exactly
Okay.
right. Yeah,
Most of
yeah.
the time, unless you know you're living on a fault line, you're not thinking about earthquakes,
Right.
right? And so, you know, and to go to this, you know, when you were younger, when you said you believed the story, she was mean to me or whatever, well, you know, maybe she was mean to you. What we're talking about is the meaning of the mean, right?
Wow.
It's the meaning of her being mean is up to you. The impact of her being mean is something you actually have a radical degree of control over. But most of us never discover this because we don't have adequate mechanisms for initiation into emotional adulthood, because most adults are not emotional adults. And
Mhm.
it's not their fault, because the generation before them didn't initiate them either.
Right. It's true.
Um, and that's why, you know, sometimes I feel despair, but then there's other times I think, oh, like when you taste the best of life, even for a moment, if you could persuade other people, hey folks, there's actually a lot more of this best out there. There's a lot more of it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean life isn't hard. I mean, one of the people that I always invoke here is Viktor Frankl,
Mm.
who experienced being in a concentration camp and whose wife was murdered in a concentration camp.
Mhm.
And he didn't come out of that experience and say, I wasn't in a concentration camp and my wife wasn't murdered,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
He said, what I did with those facts
Yeah.
matters more than some kind of objective notion of what those facts
Mm.
were. And I have to be careful how I say this, because it can sound a little bit like pull yourself up by your bootstraps or chin up, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's always people who've suffered more than you. This is not what I'm saying at all.
Mhm.
I mean, you might actually choose to pursue the deepest lament and grief and mourning for those things before you do anything else.
Yeah.
And then you might choose to pursue a challenging life of exposing anti-Semitism and the overhang of Nazism after the Second World War. You know, it doesn't mean that you say, I'm going to go and live in a bed of flowers forever.
Yeah.
It just means I'm going to be able to, I'm going to cultivate something on the inside of me that opens up an unshakable part of myself so that it is always living in a bed of flowers, no matter what else is happening to the
Mm.
rest of me.
Yeah. It's yes, finding your center that you can come back to
Mm-hmm.
when you need to. I think part of maybe why we're not inducted into some sort of more mature emotional maturity is, we don't have as many storytellers around as we used to, Gareth. I mean, I always find it intriguing that that's what you identify yourself as a storyteller. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that, because to me, a storyteller is part of an oral tradition
Mm-hmm.
that um, it just doesn't, it seemed to me, seems like you're the only storyteller I know. Okay, just so that's, I know lots of people who are call themselves writers.
Mm-hmm.
Those are writers of stories.
Sure.
But you say storyteller. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to lovingly offer you some feedback and say that I think you know more than one storyteller, because what I've come to believe is that all human beings are storytellers. The problem is most of us are unconscious of this
Mhm.
for most of our lives, and the stories we're telling are either not true or not as true as they could be, or we're not telling them in the most helpful way.
Hmm.
And I think there's one of the like the best art today, the best stories being told in movies, literature, television, video games, um, journalism, is the most psychologically sophisticated storytelling in the history of the world. Of course it is, because psychology is more sophisticated than it was 20 years ago or 1,000 years ago. It doesn't mean Shakespeare or Greek myth has nothing to teach us. It just means we read it through, the best way to read it is to read it through the most intelligent lens available to us today. Hippocrates had something useful to say about medicine, but he was wrong about where the common cold comes from. Right? It doesn't have anything to do with four humors in your body. And the people before him thought it was about sins that your parents had committed. But it doesn't mean there isn't something to build on there. We look back and we go, what was the wisest bit? And what were they striving for? And we try to emulate integrity, not necessarily their conclusions.
Yeah.
So what we have right now is this mixed competing messaging going on in our society, because I think there are actually more active public storytellers than we've ever had, because every human with a smartphone owns a publishing company, right? And what they do on social media is a form of storytelling. And then it's much easier to make a movie, or particularly to make a short film, than it's ever been. So there are more voices rising. And because of the expanding circle of empathy in the world, there are more different kinds of people getting access to tell stories that get observed, listened to. Very strange thing happened yesterday. There's one of the Oscar-nominated short films this year is a Palestinian film called The Present, about a Palestinian father and his daughter who go through a checkpoint to go and buy a new fridge for his wife and her mother, and then are harassed on the way back. It's about 15 minutes long. It's a beautiful film. We watched it a few weeks ago. I was very moved by it. And John Brennan wrote an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday, telling people how thrilled he was about this short film, The Present, about this Palestinian family's experience, and how it reminded him of when he first went to Israel, Palestine in 1976 as a student. He was aware as a traveler that he got quickly through the checkpoints, and that the Palestinian people had to wait at longer checkpoints. Now, who's John Brennan? He's the former director of the CIA.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I did not expect the former director of the CIA to advocate for a Palestinian short film.
Yeah.
And to advocate that US Americans would watch it to get some insight into what happens when politics is based on the indignity of a large section of the population. Now, there's a very complex conversation to be had there, but there's an example of this Palestinian storyteller and the former head of the CIA somehow found each other. So we live in a very strange time.
Don't we? Yeah.
And there are some terrible stories being told, conspiracy theories being told. But conspiracy theories have been around for as long as good stories. And apocalyptic end times myths have been around ever since the first human being realized there would be an end to our lives. They're all really subsets of this fear story, this separation story. So the invitation that got woken up in me through mentors, through people who did initiate me, and through the experience of living in Northern Ireland at a time when, part of it was pure, you could call it pure chance. I was born into a family where my mother is a speech and drama teacher. So she taught me more about story. She would tell us the stories, the narratives of Shakespeare plays when we would be on long road trips. So I learned about Hamlet and Macbeth when I was 11. And I wanted to go to live theater, but it was too expensive.
Mm.
So I started going to the movies instead because it was cheap and you could go by yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
And that opened up to me what Roger Ebert called a machine for empathy. I would
Mm.
see stories from the other side of the world, or even just the other side of the street, about people who were not like me, but were obviously deeply like me.
Mhm.
The first time I remember this happening was seeing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when I was 13 on television. And the characters in that film, who are institutionalized, some involuntarily, are not like me at 13 years old, living in just outside Belfast at all. But there was something in my mind and heart as watching it that, like, I found I was crying.
Ah,
I was crying at their pain.
yeah.
And I was feeling inspired by the actions of the chief. I don't want to, I'll not spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but there's a tremendously liberating action that the leading the Native American character takes. And it was many years later that I began to see the whole film as a metaphor for colonialism and oppression, and the indigenous people of Turtle Island having a voice that's been repressed, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
To me, growing up where I grew up, that's a million miles away, but it was also right deep in my heart right now.
Yeah.
I think that we're invited to initiate each other into just becoming conscious of the fact that we're telling stories all the time. And we should ask ourselves, is the story true? And is the story helpful? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, or it could be truer, or it could be more helpful,
Yeah.
we have some work to do. And this starts from, what do I think about my nation? What do I think about my name?
Mm-hmm.
What do I think about where I came from?
Mm-hmm.
What do I think about what meaning is, what security is, what I'm here for, how I should relate to my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have never thought about these things.
Right.
We've just been told,
Yeah.
this is what you do. And then we've also been told, and if you do that, it will lead to this. Now, one of the helpful things about the bombardment of stories that's around us right now is it's getting harder and harder for people to pretend that doing this leads to this.
Mm.
But doing it this way leads to security, leads to happiness. It doesn't.
Right.
We might want to look at this part and ask, just what is the story that's driving us?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think one of the fears you mentioned is the one that, actually is about the story I told about you telling me a story, is this fear of a meaningless life.
Yeah.
And I think that the way I'm hearing you say it is that drives us to tell story and to maybe grasp onto story and cling to them. Which is a lot of what I see in conspiracy theory, or if you're trying to talk someone out of a story,
Mm.
that's not going to work because they're holding on to it for good reason. It's
Mhm.
giving them something, right? And so I want to let you respond to that, and then say maybe we'll take a comment or two from the chat room.
Yeah.
After
Actually,
we
what is
talk about this.
I'll read one side of a page and 5 lines from the section on fear of a meaningless life.
Go for it. Yeah.
So each of the chapters deals with one fear, or tries to address one fear: the fear of being alone, fear of death, so forth.
Mhm.
This is, and then each chapter concludes with a practice. And I see that there's already a question about what practices empower us to overcome our negativity bias. And the idea is that when you engage these practices over time, they start to become second nature. And just like I wouldn't try to run a marathon tomorrow because I haven't trained for it. In fact, if I tried to run a marathon tomorrow, I'd either stop very soon or die. But if I ran half a kilometer tomorrow and then built up over 6 months, I might be able to run a
Well, yeah.
marathon in six.
But Gareth, how many miles did you make us walk from one end
On
of
our
Belfast
Ireland
to
retreat.
the other? Yeah. How
It
many?
did you good. It did you good.
Yeah, I almost died, but we traversed the entire city, and we lived, though we lived.
So this is called the third way to not be afraid.
Mhm,
Ask what's yours to do and how to do it.
mhm.
There are billions of choices on the way that leads to a meaningful life or a wasted one. A meaningful life is easily recognized. A meaningful life is one lived in purposeful service to the common good, inhabiting the kind of community that invites our unique gifts to flourish and helps us meet our needs. Sadly, many of us never discover what we're here for, never finding clarity about how we are made to serve and receive in community and where and among whom we will most thrive. It doesn't have to be this way. Start by asking, what are the most meaningful things I know about myself? If you don't know, and if you do, ask also what others say is meaningful about you.
Mhm.
If you don't know that, and if you do, ask yourself what kind of person you want to be near. And then let's do this. Get a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left, write down all the things that you imagine would be life-giving to the people you want to be near. On the right, write down all the things that you imagine would be death-dealing to the people you want to be near.
Mhm.
Then fold the piece of paper down the middle with the left facing up. All the life-giving things, all the things that you feel would be life-giving for people you want to be near. Pin it to a wall or a refrigerator, or keep it in your bag so that you can remind yourself to try to do one thing on that list every week. Then sit still and look at the miracle of your body, at the view outside your window, at the contours of the face of someone you admire. Close your eyes and let time become something other than your habitual expectation. Ask yourself this simple question: how can I be of service? Do this often enough, and over time, your life's mission will come to you. Want the fast track? Your mission is to heal yourself and others through being of service, honoring the ecosystem, your neighbor, and yourself, and devoting yourself to love.
Mhm.
You get to figure out what that looks like. And as you live into it, you will discover the meaning of who you are.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it to me, it feels that you're tapping in to what we all want. And that is such a powerful, positive way for me to think about who human beings are. We all have this desire for meaning. To me, that is like one of the most beautiful things. And you're right, it has to do um, with service, with being the person you want to be for other people. And that's in us. It's in us, right? And what those exercises you're offering is to awaken it, to to activate it, I guess, right? Act on it. It's
We have
just,
a
it's beautiful.
we have a 93-year-old neighbor who got irritated last year because the pandemic led to her not being able to volunteer at the food bank anymore.
Oh,
And hopefully not permanently. I imagine she'll be able to go back and volunteer again soon.
yeah,
And to be around Alma, it's clear it just would be unthinkable for her to not be involved in some form of service.
yeah,
Now, part of the challenge is service has been presented to lots of us as a chore
yes.
or a punishment or an optional extra, a hobby. And then others of us have been told we don't have anything to give. We don't have any place to serve from, or we have overvalued the upfront gifts of being on a stage or having a spotlight on you.
Yeah.
We've valued those gifts over the things that aren't seen or are less seen.
Mhm, mhm,
They tend to be, gifts of hospitality and so forth.
mhm.
And what I think is really healthy is when we're in circles, close circles in our local communities, where your gift and my gift function together as part of a whole. I serve, you serve. I know something about your needs, you know something about my needs, and we help meet each other's needs at the same time.
Yeah.
The two problems, we either tend to get martyrs who try to do it all, or we get people who feel that they've nothing to offer, and then there's some people who just kind of, let's say they haven't yet fully shaken off their naturally occurring selfishness. You know, and to which I say, me too, right? You know,
Yeah,
that's still being worked on in me. But there's nothing like the joy of being in interdependent circles where
Yeah.
everybody does a bit of serving and everybody does a bit of receiving.
Yeah.
And it's not rocket science.
No, it's not. And it's natural. I mean, in a previous life, I was a Montessori preschool teacher. And now I'm joyfully a grandma of kids in that age bracket, that, 3 to 6 year olds. And that if you let kids help you, they're happier than you can imagine. My little 7-year-old granddaughter was helping get ready to sleep over at grandma's house because her mom was going out of town. And she had organized her stuff and put it in her suitcase. And my daughter was saying, thanks for doing that. And what did little Gracie say was I helpful, Mom? And that's what she wanted to know. Was I helpful? Of course you were, honey. Yes.
Yeah.
That's what she wanted. And I think it is what we all want, but I think it gets beaten out of us. Like you say, we get punished for, or turn it into a chore or something.
We're also not particularly good at affirming service and expressing true gratitude for it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And I'm part of these circles where we try to learn just how to be articulate around things like saying, hey, thank you. And this is why I'm thanking you. This is what the impact was of the thing that you did.
Yeah.
This is why it matters to me.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. And when, again, it just takes a couple of choices.
Right.
Someone needs to go first.
Yeah.
And then a snowball starts to accrue.
It's amazing. Well, and may I just brag on this little granddaughter again?
Of course.
When she was about 4 or 5, she would say, she calls me Mimi, I love you, Mimi. And I'd say, I love you too. And she said to me once, no, don't say that. Don't say that. What should I say? Well, when I say I love you, Mimi, you say thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's not a competition. I love you, you love me. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'll try that. But it's what you're getting at. It's this sense of gratitude, and not that it's an obligation. Love is not an obligation. It's a gift. And, that's why you have grandkids, to teach you. But we got a question here from Tim, and I also, I share that, Gareth. What moved you to write the book? We talk about telling the stories we need to hear, but what moved you to want to share this with us?
I needed to I needed to do some serious work to move toward healing more of my own fear. And I'm a kind of a strange person in that when I want to learn something more, on a number of occasions now I've written a book about it. as an attempt at kind of going through my own journey on it. And but probably the deeper thing is, I think it's in terms of the temporal pragmatic threats that I think exist in the world. You could say that the rise of authoritarian populism is a major one, that the climate emergency is a major one, and the continued existence of the threat of a nuclear conflict. In terms of the actual threat to human lives lost and ecological devastation, those are probably the three biggest threats. But what underpins them all is unnecessary fear. And the unnecessary fear that gives rise to tribalism, and by tribalism, what I mean is my identity depends on diminishing yours. Right? It's not the same thing as forming groups in which I like our team and I respect your team. I liken it to, you know, there's movie fans like me, and there's people who like cricket, and they usually don't overlap. And I'm never going to voluntarily go to a cricket match, but I'm totally happy for the cricket lovers to have their cricket.
Absolutely.
Don't hit the ball through my window, and I won't tell you can't play cricket, right? So obviously sometimes we do need to hold harder boundaries whenever there's an active threat, and so on and so forth. But most of this story that we are a threat to each other and that we need to eradicate or defeat each other is totally unnecessary story. And worse than unnecessary, it's delaying the incarnation of beloved community, right? Like beloved community is there for the taking, or there for the making. It's there for the making. And we're closer to it than we think. And there's clearly places where it's already fully manifesting. Now, it will not be, sorry, I shouldn't say fully, but as fully as it can be while there is still any lack of it on the planet. There's some places where it's obvious. People are living in interdependent relationships with each other. They're caring for each other. They're meeting each other's needs, and they are more prepared to die than to kill. That's happening. And I've totally lost the track. Oh, why did I want to write the book? Because I wanted to say things like that. And I think Tim also asked the question about what practices empower us to overcome our negativity bias. You know, all the practices in the book speak to that, but the two that I would name, if you're only going to do two, one is to breathe more slowly. And I imagine folks on this call connecting with Raven and so on, you're familiar with forms of mindfulness, meditation, and so on and so forth. Any practice that comes from a wisdom tradition or a neuroscientifically credible tradition that enables you to slow down your thinking out of the rat race, out of what Thomas Merton called the violence of the pressure to do everything, or to do more and to do more and to do more. So there's a breathing practice in the book that I learned in therapy. It's dead easy. It's just breathe more slowly, and do that a lot. And the other thing is, consider, in terms of your media consumption, consider if either the outlet that you're paying attention to, or the individual journalists that you're paying attention to, if you would want to have them as friends in your personal life, or if you would consider them more as people who need help, or people who need to be kind of held at a bit of a distance. I've been a journalist. I know a lot of journalists of integrity. I also know the system, and the system in the establishment media on the left and the right has a negativity bias.
Absolutely.
And certainly has a bias toward the spectacular bad, rather than the gradually occurring, evolving good. That's the other practice, is ask yourself, who am I paying attention to? And would I pay attention to them if I actually knew them?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of cases where you maybe have to risk being a bit arrogant around this, where if you were really honest, you might realize you know more than they do. And then there are other sources. That's part of the beauty, part of the light and the shadow of the internet, is we can get access to more reliable, thoughtful sources of information. Ourworldindata.org, humanprogress.org are two websites. The Philosopher's Mail, which was a website that was set up just to last a year, so I'm not sure if it's archived, from based on a book by Alan de Botton called The News, A User's Guide, which was about looking at the psychology of the way what gets filtered into a 30-minute news broadcast distorts reality.
Of course. Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and I would encourage people to go to your magazine, the Porch, which is a wonderful resource for looking at things in a little more hopeful, positive way without denying the truth of the world is not perfect. There's some
yeah,
bad stuff, but we can find the good. And
yeah, and
yeah.
sorry, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to also mention Movies and Meaning and Porch Circles, and especially Porch Circles as a way, a practice that you offer for folks, a way to build community and to find um, that way of being supportive for one another and being appreciative for what you can give one another. Maybe you could just say a little what a Porch Circle is.
Sure. Porch Circle is a method of gathering in groups of 3 or more. You probably want to, you max out at about 8, 10, or 12 people, and you just get together. You can have a meal or a cup of coffee, and you ask 4 questions. And these are in the book. The first question is, what's going well? And you limit it to one thing. So what's something good? And if we want to use the language of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who invented these questions, these first 2 questions, it's what are the sources of consolation in my life since we last met? And then the second question is, what's not going well, or what's tough, or what's challenging, or what's painful right now? And Ignatius would say, what are the sources of desolation? The trick with that question is we're not trying to get you to feel bad. We're not trying to induce the feeling of desolation. We're trying to step back from it and say, this was the thing that triggered this feeling of desolation. The third question, what do I feel called to do to serve the common good between now and when we next meet? And over time, if you meet in the same group, people get to know each other's sense of calling, and they get to give feedback on each other's calling. And they might say to me, Gareth, you're definitely called to those 3 things that you always say you're called to, but that 4th thing, I don't think you're called to it. and that could be an immense relief to me, or I might be like, well, I don't know, and part of the reason for that question is I think in a lot of the mindfulness work that's out there at the moment, there's no outward focus at all. It's a pure inward, relax, wake up thing, and that may be help. I'm sure that is helpful to some degree, but I imagine I don't think it can be permanent, and I don't think it's complete. Service to the common good, which includes the ecosystem, not just people. And then the 4th question is, how can we help each other? And I've sat in 2 of these circles for several years, and when we get to the how can we help each other question, it can be amazing. My husband and I moved house twice last year, and our circle, people in our circle, we could not have moved house without them lifting things for us and with us. And then it can go to deeper things like grief. One of the people in our group, one of his closest friends, died suddenly. And the Porch Circle became a place where he was able to talk about his friend often for months, So, and again, part of the reason for the 4 questions is you don't need higher level advanced degrees in group facilitation to ask these 4 questions. One caveat is it's really good to have a timer and agree with the circle. Is it probably 2 minutes per question per person? Because there are folks who will maybe talk more, and there's folks who maybe feel like they don't have much to say. They don't have to fill the 2 minutes, but knowing that 2 minutes is there can often encourage people to be more forthcoming.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's very powerful. And before we come to the end, though, Gareth, I wanted to ask you something that's very much a concern of us at Raven, and you phrase it perfectly in the book. And I want to just read that question to you that you asked and ask you to help us through it, to answer it. And the question is, how can you find God when you've been damaged by bad religion?
Oh, mercy.
And
Well,
I'm giving you 7 minutes to handle
I was
that.
going to say I've like 4.5 minutes.
But I mean, you were very open in the book about your own upbringing and your experiences. And I think, many people, unfortunately, for different reasons, have been wounded or dismissed or judged
Yeah.
in church contexts. And give us
Yeah.
something.
How can you find God when you've been damaged by bad religion? Is that the question?
That's your question, my friend.
So there's lots of answers. One would be, if you've been damaged by bad religion, you don't have to do anything. There's no have to, especially coming from someone who's, still connected to and perceived to be religious. You don't have to do anything. There may be other people who have to do something. There may be other people who owe you some amends and some apology. And you maybe don't want to hear from them, and that's fine. That's fine too. Totally legitimate. That's one answer. Another answer, another response: how do you find God when you've been damaged by bad religion? One step at a time. Lifelong journey. And one of the first steps would be to imagine the possibility that there may be a part of you that wasn't damaged after all. Maybe a part of you that was kept secure inside you, that your own psyche actually protected. And the reason why you even feel the question pulling at your heart is because that part is feeling safe enough now to poke its head out from where it has been keeping itself safe. Another response would be when you've done that, or when you've started to experiment with that, if you find that a credible hypothesis, you might want to ask, you might want to experiment with the possibility that it wasn't God that damaged you. That if God is real, and I have a very imperfect definition of what the word God might mean in the book. It's deeply imperfect, as all language is. A friend of mine, I borrowed this definition and kind of maybe reshaped it. I'm not sure if I just entirely borrowed it from Michael Dowd, that God is reality with a capital R and then some. Right? If God is real, whether God has a personality or just manifests to us humans with a personality, because that makes sense. And if God is love, then God was suffering alongside you. And that the bad religion, or the part of the religion that was bad, wasn't speaking for God. It was mistaken at best. It was sincerely mistaken. At worst, it was consciously harming you. I actually see a lot more sincerely mistaken bad religion than I see consciously harmful bad religion. Most people are just trying to get their legitimate needs met and haven't found out how to do that legitimately. And there's people who got captivated by a theological perspective that then caused them to start churches and exercise power over those churches. And when they were on their own at night, they had supreme doubts about what they were doing, but they had no one to bring those doubts to. And so they just kept replicating the sincere mistake or the piece of the truth that they were best at. So the last thing I would say then comes from Bishop Yvette Flunder, an extraordinary woman in the Bay Area, with an amazing ministry. She's part of the queer community, and she's ministered deeply in a part of the country that was where the queer community, the gay male community in particular, was decimated by the AIDS pandemic. And Yvette would say there might come a time when it's time to go get your God back. That it's time to say, I'm not going to let the damage that was done to me prevent me from this joy, prevent me from this blessing and this gift. It doesn't mean we go back into the institution that was screwed up the first time around.
Yeah.
But it might. For some of us, that might be the calling.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, perhaps you might look over there and see that there's something over there that's calling to you. But I want to return to, you don't have to do anything if you've been damaged by bad religion. I waited a long, long time before I went back to church, and the church that welcomed me and embraced me and that my husband and I discovered together turned out to be a place I didn't think existed.
Yeah.
And so you never know a story's over, especially when you're in it. Also means you don't know everything. And I say that to me. One of the things that Gareth needs to hear is there's times in my life when I have felt despair because something isn't working and something I've tried to fix isn't getting fixed.
Yeah.
And I remember hitting a point a couple of years ago where, with tears, in rage at myself, saying, I've tried everything and it doesn't work, right? About this particular issue. And somebody reflecting back to me, well, in order to have tried everything, you would have to know everything. And then they said, and the part of everything that you tried, did you really try it? And I was able to go, well, you're right, I haven't tried everything. And a lot of the things that I tried, I didn't really try.
Yeah, that's so funny. I know. It is funny. But I think this whole sense of when you've been hurt, it's what I said in the introduction is I really think that when you have doubts and you feel the wound, honor that truth of the wound and don't stay where people are hurting you.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But also I think these, even as simple questions and doubts, are sometimes they're made to feel like, well, faith means you have no doubt and you have no question. And I really think God speaks to us through the questions. God is prompting us to ask, did you really try everything, Gareth? Like, are you so sure?
Well, and one other thing is, like, one of the things I had never tried was to stop trying. And that actually opened a door to something that might work. I never tried the notion that maybe I don't need to try. Maybe there's actually nothing here to fix.
Okay.
And one thing, just with you saying there about, like, we sometimes get told that faith is certainty and so forth. This may not be true in all cases, but I think most of the time, if you're part of a religion and you're scared to leave it, that is a sign that you should leave it.
Yeah. Oh.
But don't leave into a vacuum. See if you can find someone else on the other side who'll be a friend to you on the way out.
For sure.
Because good religion should not terrify people.
Yeah.
When the Hebrew Bible says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, maybe this is the last thing I'll say about fear. Like, and we didn't really, there's a whole thing about, we use the word fear to mean lots of different things, like we use the word love to mean lots of different things, but the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's not the same fear as the fear of watching The Exorcist or the fear of things that go bump in the night. I actually think that word, what it really means is respect for reality with a capital R is the beginning of wisdom. Right? That, like, and one of the things that's in the nature of reality, as I perceive it, is that love is the protagonist of the story that we're living in. And that love does, I don't even like to say love conquers all, because I'm not too much into conquering or defeating, but love transforms all.
Yeah.
It does not mean that we are not going to suffer or even die on the way to that happening.
Mm.
We just don't need to think about it that much, and we don't need to invite death and invite more horror into our lives.
No.
We're all going to die of something.
Mhm.
So let's die not trying constantly to keep trying the things that don't work. Let's give ourselves to the hypothesis that maybe we're not the center of the story. Maybe love is actually the center and the backdrop, and that we get to play a part in this story, just like everybody else. And Suzanne, you have a big show-stopping number called Your Life, and I have a big show-stopping number called My Life. And when you're doing your life, the rest of us are supposed to be behind you, say, whoa, look at Suzanne. And Suzanne's supposed to be going, whoa, isn't love amazing? And it doesn't mean no suffering. It does not mean no suffering.
Yeah.
It just means suffering is not the most important thing that's ever going to happen to us.
Yeah, but love is, and I think, and that is so powerful, Gareth. I needed you to say that because my personality flaw is I want to fix everything. Like someone's hurting, what can I do? How can I make it better? And I think just not having to fix allows you to just be present, right? If you can let go of having to make it better or having to have the answer, I think it's an ego thing. I have to have the answer to solve it for you. Come on, I'll fix it. And I'm just so glad you said that there at the end, because that's something I needed to hear too, about love is love is the hero of the story. Not you, not me. And so that's just so powerful. So Gareth, I know we're running over, and I wanted to end with asking you to read one of the blessings at the end of the book. But I do want to just answer a couple of just questions. Oh yes, maybe you can answer that. Where can I see the recording? Kelly wants to know.
We'll send an email to everybody who registered for this, and so if you're on the call, it's because you registered for it. And
yes,
Kelly, I know you well, and I'm grateful for all your support and affirmation. It's always lovely to have you on call. So we'll send the link once it's been posted.
And it looks like people, if you subscribe to the Porch magazine, you'll send the link to.
We'll probably, I'm sure we'll do that too.
That's super. So Gareth, because you do end with blessings, which I think are just gorgeous. And I wanted to end with one blessing. For those who have the book, it's on page 202. It's the blessing for when the world seems too much. And, we talked about a lot of different things that can overwhelm us today. And I thought we could maybe end with that blessing. And maybe do you want to share did you write, is this a blessing you wrote, or did you?
I wrote this. I don't know that any of us write anything by ourselves, but my fingers were typing on the keyboard when these words came out, but they were influenced by lots of other storytellers. And this particular blessing was influenced by a play that I saw that was so powerful. I went to see it 3 times. I've never done that before. It's called The Inheritance. And it's about gay men in 2015, 2016, 2017, in their 30s, being mentored by a gay man in his late 50s, early 60s. And these younger men being more clearly introduced to the story of what had happened to the gay community in the 1980s in particular, at the height of the AIDS pandemic, in the gay community at least. And one of the characters in this play feels so scared and feels so guilty that he survived, that even though he's a billionaire, he cannot make himself free, right? He's still trapped in the psyche of someone who has survivor guilt and this intense need to protect himself. And one of the most important moments in the play is when somebody is able to speak to this man when he has opened his heart enough to say, I really want to change.
Mm.
And he's basically saying, what should I do in light of the fact that I carry this memory of this suffering that went before, and I'm here now, and I can't fix this suffering that went before. And this would mean a whole lot more if we'd watched the whole play together. But I risk oversimplifying it by quoting it here. But the response to this character saying, "What should I do? What should I do now? Now that I'm ready to break out of this self-protective guilt," and the other character says to him, and it moves me every time I think about it, you do what they could not. You live. So here's the blessing. Mm-hmm. A blessing for when the world seems too much. You are light. You are holy. You are called into this moment, this time and place. Invisible hands hold you. You are not cursed. You are called. You have made it this far. And now is not the time to start fighting against reality. Some folks didn't make it this far. May we do for them what they are no longer able to do. Live. Thank you, Suzanne, for having me.
Thank you, Gareth. I always feel blessed when I'm with you. And I hope people have felt supported and encouraged by our conversation. And I know the book is very, very helpful and moving as we go through recovering from loss and pain and suffering that we've all been going through the past year. And so thank you. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for being you. It's just a joy. And thank you everyone who joined us live and who will join us in the future by watching the recording. So thanks everybody. And thanks again, Gareth. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Bless you.